Hi, squad. Henry here. Just while I'm doing the editing, just like to say sorry that I've released the podcast a day late. I thought I could get the podcast edited Monday night after work, which was a grave miscalculation. Also, it just occurred to me that I've never introduced the band who do the intro and outro music. They're a band called Indifferent Engine from Hertfordshire. Links to their Spotify will be in the description. So I've got to say a big thank you to our 6 subscribers. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video.
Thank
Blah blah
you.
blah. YouTube algorithm. You've heard it all before in like every single YouTube video you've ever watched. In fact, like don't subscribe. Maybe we should be telling people not to subscribe. Be a bit anarchist, be a bit counterculture.
No, I think let's not try to reinvent the wheel too much here.
Yeah.
Might end up hitting us in the face. Let's just do it the normal way. People, you gotta subscribe. You gotta smash like, okay? Otherwise,
Don't smash like twice though, because it'll unlike it. Just the once.
yeah,
Don't
don't
get carried
smash it
away.
twice. Smash it once,
Yeah.
and then you'll get our content every week. And also look at the links in the description.
Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Empty Gallery podcast. As always, it's me, your host, Henry Pucknell, and I'm joined by my good friend.
Daniel Soares.
In this episode, we're going to talk about materials, as in materials we're using at the moment, materials we've used in the past, and what materials we think we're going to be using in the future.
So I am at the moment, I've worked in a lot of materials, but right now I'm painting, and right now, specifically at this moment, I'm working towards completing a few figurative paintings. Having come off doing abstract painting, conceptual art, a bit of performance art, and sculpture and installation throughout most of my 20s, now I'm doing figurative painting. And I'm doing that. I've done it in oils, and now I'm working in watercolor, charcoal, pastel, that kind of thing. Oil color is the last one that I'll work in. I'll work in that at the end. But what about you, Henry?
Dan, can we have a leak? Can you let us know what this figurative painting is going to entail? Is it like a piece of architecture? Is it like a nude? Or are you going to keep it secret?
Oh, I'm doing. So, all right. I was looking at that painting. There's this painting that's really fascinated me for ages. It's called. Just look it up. It's when you look up the subject of like Roman history, it's particularly the fall of Rome. This painting comes up by a guy called Thomas Couture from painted in 1847, called "The Romans in Their Decadence," which is a painting depicting all these people laying about and like they look like they're all drunk, or they all look like they're you know post post orgasm or something. They all just look exhausted, and they're all like frolicking and drinking, and they're all naked as well. A lot of them are clothed, half clothed. They all look like basically They all look like they're in public, but they all look like they're sort of. It looks like things have broken down basically. They're in public, but they're doing stuff that you wouldn't normally do in public. Like their clothes are sort of falling off, not completely off. So I'm sort of looking at that painting quite a lot, because thematically I think it's quite relevant to what's going on now in terms of, well, I don't want to sound like Western society is falling, because I don't really believe that too strongly, but just the way that sex and alcohol and so on are so public, and I'm not sure if they always have been or not. I think they maybe are now quite a lot in a big way, and a lot of people would say that too. And it's kind of like I've read about a lot of philosophers who say that it's a kind of it's very similar to what Rome was going through before they fell. However, Rome fell for other reasons too. They had barbarians everywhere who were like trying to take them down, and that happened. Whereas here it's slightly different. So I'm
Nietzsche
looking at that
hated
painting.
alcohol, didn't he? I think Nietzsche
Pardon?
was like, didn't Nietzsche say he thought alcohol was the reason the working class were poor or something because they were getting pissed all the time?
I think a lot of people say that.
I think a lot of philosophers in general just don't like alcohol because they're like, ah, it stops you from doing shit, man.
Well, yeah, I like alcohol, but yeah, I'm totally aware that it's a bit of a vice. I don't know. I think it loosens you up. I think it's nice to have a drink. Really nice. Uh, I like drinking, but there's a sort of line that you don't want to cross. You don't want to kind of become too. You don't want to. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. It's bad for your health, and it can make you do loads of inappropriate stuff.
Yeah,
So
for
drink
me,
and
it just
drugs,
makes
whilst
me
they're great,
like,
you act inappropriately.
for me, it just makes me like really fucking tired. Like if I have a beer when I get home from work, I knock out, I just fall asleep. So I generally drink kind of more socially with friends,
Yeah, socially.
or with like colleagues and stuff. But doing silly shit, yep, we've all been there. We've all done a lot of silly shit on alcohol, especially work dues. My favorite place to make a prick of myself.
Yeah, yeah. That's not something that happens to me, but I'll make a prick of myself in the middle of clubs.
Best place to do it. Best
Yeah.
place to do it.
All right, so
So,
that's
dude, that
my
sounds cool.
sort of piece. That's sort of what I'm working on. It's sort of to do with I don't know what the final outcome's going to be, and I don't want to give it up either because I don't know what it is, so I don't want to put it out there verbally. So, but it's kind of what I'm working on. I'm drawing all these figures and people in various poses, and I'm kind of thinking towards something similar to that painting or something inspired by it at least. But what about you, mate? What are you doing on? What are you working on?
So, at the moment, I'm really working on extremely abstract landscapes. I've been trying to make more resolved work as well, because in the past, I've sort of made things out of like cardboard and wooden sticks and stuff. And I really hate it when you make a piece of work and then it gets damaged, it like falls apart, it's hard to store in a way that it won't get damaged. The stuff I make, I want to be able to like punch it a few times and it to be okay, you know? I don't like these kind of like delicate work because it doesn't last. Like it sits up in your loft and it just gets damaged over time. So at the moment, I'm making a series of three pieces of work, and it's cardboard. But wait for it. It's card. It's nice card, but it's mounted on a transparent perspex backing. So the idea is that the piece of work will leave the picture plane because it can kind of bleed off onto this perspex backing, which is very much like a piece of work that Meat Man made. Of course, I'm
Bacon.
talking about Francis Bacon again, the Meat Man.
They're all like that.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of, yeah. So I really like this idea of the piece of work like
So you're
coming out
doing a
of your
backdrop. You're making a backdrop.
kind of, yeah, kind of. And I really like the idea of the piece of work leaving the picture plane and like a layered piece of work. So with the transparent layers, you can see it through it into layers that are underneath. It's like a relief because it's these built up card
Mm,
layers, so it kind of comes
yeah,
out of the picture plane. So it's just what I'm trying to do is like if you're asking a viewer to look at your piece of work for a significant amount of time, you've kind of got to make it worthy of that attention. So I don't want to
yeah,
make this piece of work which is kind of just like flat and boring and like you just look at it and you're like, you know, that's a nice landscape, you know, and then like you're bored like seconds later. I want this piece of work which is like it grabs you from across the room, like you look at it and you're like, wait a second, that's not flat, but it's not like a
yeah,
sculpture either. And how is it leaving the picture plane like that? How's that all joined
yeah.
together? I'm going to come closer. I'm going to have a closer look. I'm going to have a look at what's going on here.
Have you looked at Sigmar Polka's work?
Yeah, dude, when I was in secondary school, I fucking loved Sigmar Polk. He's been like a huge inspiration. For some reason, I've
Good.
always been drawn to art which is layered.
Yeah, yeah. His work is very layered.
Yeah, yeah, it's like very
Like,
layered print ink work. He blows up like photocopies and stuff, doesn't he?
yeah, and then he'll put like a print. He'll put like a print on top of a print on top of a print on top of a print. So it's sort of like when you look at when you get taught art at school, and you're like, right, first you got to draw the foreground, then the middle ground, and then the background, and you got the horizon. And do you remember?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although like
So there's something.
I feel like they
Yeah.
didn't teach us a huge amount because I've been looking at like composition videos on YouTube and like landscape painting videos on YouTube, and I don't remember being taught these like really strict rules. Like the foreground, the thing closest to you, that has to be the darkest. Then in the midground, the things further away is lighter, and then the sky is like the lightest part of the picture. And if you mess with that, it kind of messes up the perspective and stuff.
Mm.
And I've noticed you can kind of reverse it. You can have the foreground be lighter and the midground be darker, but it's harder to do. And if you type in like landscape at night into Google Images, um, the results aren't that great. Like light is critical to landscape painting. It's always like sort
Mm.
of like landscapes by moonlight, and they look quite amateur. So
Landscape at night.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Look at this. Okay, yeah.
they don't
It's
look
just
as
all dark,
realistic.
isn't it?
Yeah. So
Um,
I've been watching these compositional videos a lot, and this piece of work I'm working at the moment, I've like extremely carefully planned it out in Photoshop beforehand. Like I've used perspective grids in Photoshop, so it looks like there's the perspective's correct. Lighting, I've messed around with lighting. Where's the light source coming from? I've started with a picture of an office and I've abstracted it, I've pixelated it, I've moved different elements around.
hmm.
So this piece of work is basically taking me fucking forever. Partly because I work slowly, and partly because I work very slowly, and I don't work on it
Yeah.
enough. I do not work on it enough. I know that much.
Well, the thing is, we've got time. We've got other responsibilities, so it's pretty hard to just work on one thing.
Yeah.
But it's good. I mean, I've been doing that as well. I've been working on. I was telling you earlier, I've been working towards I don't know what the word is for it, but it's sort of like when you're at school, you're like, oh, let's work on our final piece. Um, I've been sort of instead of making, because what I'm used to making is very spontaneous work, very spontaneous images, and taking ready-made objects and cobbling things together in the space of a few hours or less than an hour, and that takes a while. And no, that doesn't take a while. Sorry, that's it. The whole thing has just felt very disposable and very meaningless, and now I'm too quick. Now I'm putting way more thought into a piece of art, and I'm putting way more time into it, and I'm like thinking about the composition, the significance, the idea. I'm putting all this time into it, and I spend so much time not doing that, and I don't know why, but I feel so much more fulfilled by it already. I don't buy into the idea of like, oh, you have to, like, back at university where or at university everyone is like forced to pigeonhole themselves into a style quote, and they're forced to like write a blurb about what their work's about, like in their early 20s, like, oh, I make art that is about this and this and this, and this is what I make art about. It's like, no, no, you don't. No, you don't know what you make art about, one. And two, you're going to scare yourself, right, by what you make next. And three, like, just let go of that, be a bit more flexible, and decide that, and come to the conclusion that you're going to make loads of different things. And so, yeah, I'm kind of letting go of some older stuff that I used to do, and that was like a phase, and I'm glad I did it. And yeah, I mean, it's all still there for people to look at. People can look at that. It's in the back catalogue now, though. Adios. Yeah, so now I'm putting more time into something, and I've gone back to the technique. I've gone back to figuring out like how, like, I was trained like classically until like from a young age. So by the time I went to uni, to art school, I was already quite competent at representational drawing and drawing in ink and oil painting and acrylic painting. I was already very competent. So right now, I'm just remembering that, I'm just revising that stuff again and putting together a figurative artwork that can stand on its own. But yeah, and then after that, God knows what I'll do. But I'm already having ideas about like reversing the colors, and it's just like really, I've been looking at Renaissance paintings for a long time, and now's the time to do something sort of like that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm putting the time into it, and that's it really.
Yeah, something a bit grander. I've
Grand,
been
yeah.
thinking the same thing for a while now. We're not in art school anymore. We haven't got all day to work on art stuff. So the time that you do put into it is a lot more precious. So you want to be utilizing that time effectively. You kind of don't want to be making lots of smaller, kind of scrappy pieces of work. You can do that maybe, but it's got to be towards a higher goal of developing a more grand piece of work which you can actually
Mm.
exhibit. I'm probably like too far along in that spectrum. I probably could do with making a few like smaller pieces of work. I think I think once I get this piece of work I'm working on at the moment out of the way, I'll go back into like the drawing board, the sort of development stage. But at the
Yeah.
moment, I'm just like all of my time is like focused on getting this piece of work done. I don't want to like get sidetracked and start doing more kind of like sketchbook work and stuff.
It's the traditional, to be honest, it's the traditional way of thinking about it. The old way of thinking about art was like, right, you have this project, this grand masterpiece you need to build now, and that's what you're going to do. You've spent your whole life practicing and training the technical ability. Now it's time to make this thing, and it's time to make these. It's time to knock out a couple of these a year. And yeah, I felt like back at art school, actually, it was more like, oh, what's, you've got to focus on the process. Oh, do you like this gestural painting I just made? No. No, I'm just kidding. I like gestural paintings, whatever. But like, it's been like, oh, do you like this gestural piece of work? And we make a gesture, and we do things with yeah, Jesus Christ, all that stuff is just I it just doesn't really get you anywhere. I don't know, like I'm thinking now, like that stuff is very hard to access, and it's very ambiguous. It's very hard to explain. And when you explain to someone, oh, this painting I've done is all about gesture and process, it's just like, God, I just sound like, I feel like a tosser when I say shit like that.
Yeah,
And
no, I get what you mean. Not everyone kind of appreciates gestural painting, so you might have paintings like that, and people will walk in and look at them for like a few minutes, and then walk straight out and be like, but other people might look at them for longer.
I mean, I've done plenty, and I get it, I understand them, but I feel like they're all about this, they're all the same, they're all about the same thing. I feel like all these paintings, um, although they're made by different artists, I think they're all about the same thing. They're all abstract. They're all just as ambiguous as each other. They all have very similar gestures to each other. And if you were to ask this one artist, one abstract painter after the other about what their paintings are about, they'll probably tell you something that's very, very similar. They'll probably come up with very similar justifications for them. And I feel like when I was explaining my painting, like my abstract paintings, I feel like I'm sort of just talking about. I feel like I'm just reproducing the same words as Mark Rothko, the same words as Twombly, as Pollock. I feel like I'm just reproducing what they said, because I'm basically making the same thing they made, and that's a problem for me. I can't just say what someone else did like 50 years ago. It's just not enough, and yeah, I feel like that's the case with a lot of painters.
I tried to drop some Rothko Buster rhymes, and they said my linking my work to linking my work to Rothko was kind of like misplaced. You know, when we had our final assessment on our degree piece, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
shit. I was like, but I used all the same colors as him and stuff. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's tricky, isn't it? You got to find your own voice, haven't you? So
Yeah. On the subject of materials, Dan, you were making oil paintings, but you've changed recently, right?
yeah, not really. Yes and no. Here's the thing: is basically when you're making when you're working towards a bigger, grander, a masterpiece. Should I just call my own piece a masterpiece? Jesus
Yeah,
Christ!
fuck it.
When you're working towards that, you have to do a lot of sketching. You have to do a lot of drafting, and the drafts have to be done in pencil, charcoal, ink, pastel, watercolor, just the smaller materials. Oil is such a big beast that you can't just draft a painting with that stuff. That stuff's like wrestling with a bear. Like you gotta. I'm doing the drafts in the lighter mediums first, and then I'll and so that when I get to the oil painting, it'll be less daunting because maybe it's just me. I find painting in painting something off the bat with oil paints is really hard because you can't. It's not very. It's like you can mess up the color really quickly. You can be like, oh shit, I put that in the wrong place, and then you have to scrape away all the paint because you can end up mixing all the colors up, and then you make this thing into like a dark gray or a dark brown or one of those tertiary colors, and I'm sort of yeah, so I'm messing around with watercolor, and I think I'm going to stick with watercolor for a bit. Also, because I don't really have the space for oil painting or the money, you know. I mean, I don't have like a warehouse studio in North London with enough space to keep like 15 6 meter by 6 meter canvases in it. I'm afraid. I wish I did, but I don't. So oil painting, whilst it's fantastic, I don't really have the space for it. And plus, like when I do it, I breathe in a lot of fumes. I haven't got much ventilation, so I will do it eventually, but it needs to be a bit more of a planned action. But yeah,
These fumes in your room, they haven't made you pass out or anything, have you? I feel like
no,
there's a story that you're not that's not being told.
no, those fumes won't make you pass out, but they'll make you they'll make you
Unattractive to the
like feel
ladies.
a bit. I feel like a bit dizzy around terps, which is fine. It's fine. A bit tipsy, sort of. It's sort of like being a bit tipsy, not too tipsy, but you feel a little bit like absent-minded. I think anyway. I'm not sure if that's like real or not.
Don't lick the brushes.
Don't drink that. Let's not talk about that.
Don't drink the
Let's not be like,
Kool-Aid. Yeah,
it's a
don't
bit
drink
like Donald
the
Trump
paint
being like,
water.
hey, you could put bleach in your veins.
Oh yeah, that's fucking awful.
God,
Yeah,
darling.
I'm kind of like yeah, I'm doing a lot more painting on this one actually, but it's acrylics and
It's fine.
just a bit amateur of painting in general. Like I was trying to make some areas of it lighter, and it wasn't really working out. And I was like, shit, maybe I should actually get like a medium, like paint. And then I've got a medium now, and it makes like a big difference. It's a bit chalkier, but the paint flow is more consistent when you use water.
Mm.
The paint tends to pool and stuff. There was a guy on our course who was an absolute master of mediums. You remember Chris Barlow?
Yeah, he was, yeah.
He did oil
Jesus, he was
paintings
good.
and he messed around with mediums loads. And he found a medium which would allow his oil paintings to dry as quick as acrylics. It was amazing. And then I've done a bit of my own research, and you can get mediums which make acrylics dry slower, so they're a bit more like oil paints.
Mm.
But the medium I've brought recently is just a medium, so the paint flows a bit more even.
What's it called?
Oh, the one I've bought. Ah, shit, I don't have it with me actually. The cheapest one I could find on eBay, Dan. That's what it's called.
I think there's different types you can get though, because when I'm at the art shop, I have a little look at that shelf, and
Yeah, yeah, the one I got by mistake.
one's
I
made of
think it's
sunflower
supposed to be
oil and shit.
for. I think it's system free. No, no, it's not system free. System free is the cheap shit.
Dale
I think it's
Around and
Daily
stuff.
Rowley, yeah, but it's meant for like shimmering colors, and I didn't
Yeah,
realize
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like, but it just says like matte medium on
Matte
the tube. So I figure
gloss.
like it
Um,
looks right. It's not like shimmering or anything, so fuck it.
Yeah, I think I need to use that sort of thing more because I've been I just all my life I've been using like just straight terps as a white spirit as like not a medium but just to wash up my paint, just to make a little washy effect with my paint, and I've been happy with that. But yeah, I've never really dived into the mediums situation.
I've got loads of gloss medium upstairs in the attic because they told us to buy some in first year. But like the gloss, I'm like, man, I'm never going to use this again because I can't imagine when I'm going to want one of my pieces of work to look glossy. I don't know, like the light kind of reflects off glossy stuff, doesn't it? And then it kind of like messes it up.
Well, yeah, I mean it's a bit like depends on what outcome you're looking for exactly. I mean, if you're doing like a sort of if you're like doing a sort of not like uh you know
High detail.
Richter like a Richter painting, or there's a lot of paintings that have these weird finishes. I mean, I've been looking at you know those modernist paintings from like the 1920s, and they just have this very chalky surface, like those Kirchner. There's these paintings by a guy called I forgot his first name, Kirchner, German painter, I think, and this the surfaces are so fucking like chalky and rugged, and and there's just their paintings of all these like weird primordial figures, and they're just chalky and like it's just crazy. I don't know how you get that effect. I don't know if maybe he actually did use a very chalky medium, but back in the 20s, I don't know what was available to you. The thing is like we got to think that back in the day, they didn't have the resources we have now. Like we have paints that are like made for us, manufactured somewhere, and they're put into like metal tubes and given, and whatever. But back in the
Yeah,
day, you used to have to go and source pigments, and then you had to make them with egg whites, and then get some sunflower oil, presumably, and mix them yourself, and all this stuff.
and not to mention the ability to massively cheat in Photoshop and like make perspective grids and work out things in advance and stuff. That's been like extremely beneficial with the painting I'm working on at the moment. If I'd had to like draw out all the perspective grids myself and yada yada yada, I think it would have taken a lot longer.
Yeah, that would take you forever. I mean, that's just daunting itself, isn't it? I find that yeah, we've got the technology to, but it doesn't nothing can replace the drive and the sort of genius of the old masters, though. Even though they didn't have the technology that we have, like they had the. I mean, we're still talking about them now.
I think they had the
So
benefit of being
because we
like
have,
rather a respected profession as well. Like back then, like painter was like, oh, you know, you're a painter, you're this respected profession, sort of like before the rise of photography. And now it's like, oh, you're like a painter, we're not going to pay you for that.
yeah, yeah, you kind of worked for the church. I'm not sure exactly how it worked.
Church bitch.
Yeah. I'm not sure how it worked, but there were plenty of artists who had day jobs as well. Like Vermeer was an optician or something. I don't know. I think he made glass. He made things for glasses or something. I'm not sure exactly, but um, yeah, yeah, it was always more. I mean, imagine if you didn't have cameras and people were walking around like, oh, can I would really like my portrait taken, or they were like, but then you didn't have the. I still feel like it hasn't changed. I don't know. I still feel like it's the same thing. Like you can, the elite class, the sort of the aristocrats of society are still kind of dictating what art is, and they're still the artists are still making art for them, and they're still paying us. So it still hasn't changed. It's always been the same, except the elite class back then doesn't look the same as it does now. And maybe there was a religious class as well, which we don't have now either, but still pretty much the same thing, really.
Why get
Um,
a painting done of yourself or like of a couple when you can just get like a photograph taken that's so much cheaper? Like, have you seen that trend at the moment where people are getting their photographs taken on their doorstep to their house? Like it's like a family picture. Because of COVID-19, it's like, oh, we can't come anywhere close to you. We'll get a picture of you on your doorstep. No one's gonna
no, I
ask for
haven't
like a
seen that.
painting on their doorstep because getting a painter to paint you is like really expensive in comparison.
No, I have seen that. Yeah. No, no, no. I haven't seen that. But that sounds really interesting. It sounds like that really famous American painting by Motherwell or Rockwell of the two farmers standing in front of their barn, and one of them has a pitchfork, and you know the one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah. The
one.
famous
It's
one, yeah.
not like everyone's getting those done. The
Oh,
thing
in the
is, we
same
might
kind of style. Yeah, I've seen a bit of that. I think it was on BuzzFeed or something.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like we are kind of an elite class. We're people in people in Britain and in Western Europe are wealthy, really. We are, and we can afford to have art all over the inside of our houses, whereas a lot of people in poorer countries don't have art in their houses, I guess. So maybe the elite class is more like maybe we all are part of that now. But that's an idea. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. And so we can afford to commission someone to come up and take a photo of us and spend a couple of £100 on that. And I mean, obviously not everyone can, but a lot of people can. Obviously, getting paintings done, it's just not fashionable either. It's not trendy, and it's not. It's a bit like what someone would be looking at you like, what was it 1800 or something? Like, why don't you just get like a really classy photo taken?
Yeah.
Imagine if models on Instagram were done by a painter. were done by painting. You know what I mean? Like
Have you seen some of
uh,
the like incredibly
fashion
high
history.
fidelity photos you can get done as well? Like, I've seen like pictures where it's like a really expensive camera and it picks out all the detail like unbelievably, and it looks like it looks like a painting. Like somebody took a picture of my dog and it was like ridiculously high fidelity. It was weird.
Well, I think that might be to do with the editing as well, though. I've been playing around with some editing software actually, and this counts as a material. When I post things on Instagram, I use a software called Snapseed, and I put my photo in there and I edit everything. So I make it sharper. I change up the contrast a bit. I bring up the highlights, I darken the shadows perhaps. I've changed the color slightly, not too much, because I want it to be true to life. So I use this software like a lot
I'll have to
to
link it
edit
in
photos.
the description.
Yeah,
Links in the description,
yeah,
Kenny.
I'll link it in the description. Not that it needs any more promotion than it has, but
Me and Dan thought we'd talk about materials we intend to use in the future as well. So for me, I think once I get my triptych done, I'm really looking to make. I really want to make like a sculpture, but using a few different processes. Like I hate to keep bringing Warhammer into this podcast, but I really like modeling party and kind of like sculpting stuff. So I've got this idea for a sculpture where part of it's made of like cubes, part of it's kind of like sculpted flesh and bone, and then part of it, the really really delicate thin stuff. I figured like shit, I could just get that 3D printed. I could just make it in a 3D program, get it sent off, and have these kind of bits dripping out of the sculpture 3D printed,
yeah.
and then maybe have like a bit of felt in the sculpture as well.
What would it be a sculpture of?
I've got this idea. I'm thinking about calling it "My Access Card Has Stopped Working." There's one time at work where I was running an assessment center, and my access card that you needed to literally get out in and out of the building and through any of the doors just completely stopped working. So it's kind of like a bit of a parody. Like you've got this thing that's called like an access card, and it stopped working completely. So it's kind of like a pointless piece of plastic. So
Hmm.
this sculpture is kind of going to be like a spaceship, but with an access card kind of hanging around its neck. So you've got this kind of implied freedom, like I could go anywhere, anywhere in space, but only if its access card is working. It's got this like access card around its neck,
Yeah.
and it'd be kind of like this kind of flesh spaceship with kind of wearing a bit of like a shirt, but it's like ripped, and it's kind of in this state of decay, and
Hmm.
also it's kind of like smoking and like dripping at the same time.
Hmm.
And what am I trying to say with it? It's kind of like this,
Is it figure or is it a figurative thing?
kind of like a figurative thing, yeah. So it's like this piss take of contemporary kind of work culture, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Ah. Yeah, I mean, I think taking techniques from the Warhammer making is surely going to help you when making a sculpture object. I used to collect Warhammer when I was at school actually, and I painted them really well. And to be honest, it was like it helped me with my painting for my like painting artwork, like in a big way because you're painting very fine detail and yeah, it's gonna help you with your like because when with your wrist and with your just your hand movement in general and with control of the paint, it helps you immensely. So I'm yeah, I'm not surprised at working on like literally like Warhammer. You could call it like an artisan thing even. You could say it's like arts and crafts. Yeah, you could say it's part of that, what they would say in the art world, like the lowbrow arts, which is just such a horrible thing to say, but
It's a bit sad, yeah. It's a bit of a horrible thing to say because so many people are doing it, and there's
yeah.
like such talent on display. It's got a lot of
Why,
merit, and
why is the
it's
word
kind of uh,
lowbrow? Like there's a highbrow. Like what the hell is highbrow art? Like please, can someone just find whoever came up with that name and just get them to explain this to me, please? Like what is highbrow? What is lowbrow? Like I get it, all right. Highbrow is the stuff that you get in the Tate and stuff, but that's not really highbrow. That's just art. That's just that. There's art and there's maybe arts and crafts, which is separate, sort of. Because making a Warhammer model isn't the same as making a unique original painting. Because the Warhammer models, like they're mass produced and it's part of a game, and it's just like when making like manufacturing like teddy bears or stuff like that, and all kinds of little artisan things like some sort of knitting and stuff. Yeah, okay, that's not like it's not like fine art and stuff, but
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I was
God.
thinking about like the other day when you're converting Warhammer models, it's like an airfix kit. So there's like a few different ways it goes together, and it's kind of like a lot easier than sort of doing a painting where you have to build it up from the ground up. It's kind of like a ready, or it's like a ready-made. It's like an action figure almost.
Yeah,
So when you're taking the extra effort to sculpt your own details from scratch or like change the poses and stuff, it's a faster like method of getting creative gratification, if that makes sense. Building like a space marine is a lot easier than like sculpting one completely from scratch out of modeling putty would be.
yeah,
And I think it's sort of unintimidating, which is why you're able to get so many people into it.
yeah. It's art. Yeah, that kind of arts and crafts it's a good way in, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Yeah,
Uh,
like making a masterpiece, as we're both embroiled in, is a shit ton of work. You know,
yeah.
you're making something completely from the ground up. Okay, so me and Dan thought we would talk about materials that we've used in the past as well. So Dan, you kind of used to, well, like I'd define me and Dan as cross-disciplinary artists. I've always kind of, I'm not like just purely sculptural, like purely painting or purely drawing. Like I have an idea and then I'm like, what's the best way to realize this idea? Is it like through drawing? Is it through like an animation? Is it through a sculpture, through a painting? And
Mm.
I just use that medium. I always use the medium which I think will be easiest to realize that piece of work. Like if I had an idea for a sculpture, I could just be like, oh, I'll just draw a perspective grid and then I'll just draw it and I'll paint this sculpture. But like if I want to make a sculpture, I want to make a sculpture. I want to get hands on, you know. I want to like make the fucking thing, you know. Dan, you've done kind of like ready-mades and like amalgamations in the past, haven't you?
Yeah. I've been so when I went abroad to Portugal for a few weeks, a few months to make some art, like a couple of years ago, like years and years ago. And when I got there, I was like, right, I need to make a bunch of stuff. And I was also like in the process of like learning about contemporary art. Like I was very young, so I was learning about like well, I was like 20. I was learning about conceptual art and contemporary art at the time, and I wanted to like dive into it. But there was this quote by Man Ray that really got me. It was he said, "If I can photograph, okay." He says, "If I can photograph something, I'll photograph something. If I can't photograph it, then I paint it." He said something like, "I paint what I cannot see." So he reserved painting for things like within his mind, and photography was like a thing for things he could see, even though his photos are still very abstract. Um, so yeah, I based off of that quote, I started to make loads of objects. I used materials like oh, I didn't use materials. Sorry, I used like found objects like bouncing off of like Marcel Duchamp, like I had to understand what the idea for the fountain, the urinal, what was the basis of that idea. And I think actually we kind of misunderstand like Duchamp, but it wasn't just Duchamp, it was also Kurt Schwitters and Rauschenberg who were like making collages out of like things that they found outside. There's that very famous Rauschenberg ready-made, which is basically like this weird goat thing. What do you call it? It's a stuffed animal. It's like a stuffed goat with like a rubber tire around it, around
Oh,
its
yeah, another one, yeah.
That's a very famous one. So I made loads of things with like, for a long time I was taking apart like mechanical objects like televisions and irons and stuff, and making these weird objects, reflecting light off them and stuff like that.
Yeah, didn't you
There
have
was,
a blender at one point? and you like blended like a bunch of shit up in it and like sprayed other people's work and shit.
No, I did.
Uh,
I had a blender and I
Laura went mental because it smelled bad or some shit. She was saying some simp shit. Not Laura, no. Who's that other girl?
I think it was like Catherine from back at
Yeah.
university. But I had yeah, I no, what I basically did was I ate all these sandwiches, spat out the contents into a bag, and then put all that contents into a blender and blended it, and it was just like mushed up sandwiches that I'd eaten that day, and that was the piece of work. I think it was supposed to be like, oh, this is what I ate today, but that was back when I was thinking along the lines of like, oh, let's make art about my day-to-day experiences. Let's make art about the everyday world, and I think back to that stuff, and I still don't know exactly where I'm coming from with it, but. Um, a lot of it was to do with politics, with like really a lot of it was to do with really contemporary ideas. So um, television television was always to do with I was reading a lot of like Marshall McLuhan, and I was really studying technology, and I'm just trying to think back to this stuff, and I can't quite remember much of it. It's just, and to be honest, the other thing is like the prospect of making sculpture out of marble, stone, or copper or bronze is just, it's just infallible. So like you kind of, the normal thing is to make it out of found material, of the materials that you find in the skip these days. And you can make loads of crazy stuff with that as well, like loads of like there's that guy Yinka Shonibari who did the like those weird ma, 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 uh, my vocabulary is so bad these days. Maquettes like mannequins of people like dressed in like colonial dress, like and stuff like that. There's a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with like objects and things. And I used to store objects like in my studio. Like, oh, I'll get back to this one day. We had loads of artists come in and describe that sort of thing to us.
Yeah, I remember them coming in and describing that process where there was that artist who like he said he literally had a shelf, and if he had stuff that he didn't know what to do with or like objects he liked, he just like put it on the shelf and just stared at them
Yeah,
for ages. He was a bit nutty though. He was that guy who he had like a spherical sphere and he stuck like a wheel on the bottom like from like a spinny chair, like an
yeah,
office chair, and then he also there was a building site and he had color swatches around the outside of it. I thought it was kind of dumb. I don't know. He made like a lot of stuff that were like kind of dumb work, but that was kind of his
it's kind of
that
his
was his
thing. Like,
style. Yeah.
you know, I can't stand that sort of thing nowadays. But yeah, that's sort of like the style of a lot of people. It's like I do naive things that naive people would do, and I'm like I'm like pretending to be naive. It's like, okay, so are you actually naive or are you putting it on? I don't understand. Like, I do understand, but like, why? It makes for interesting. I don't know. You can produce a lot of very interesting art by doing that. So nothing against that. It's just that at the moment I'm doing things that are way more refined and traditional, and um, I'm depicting ideas and concepts in the old-fashioned way. And part of it is also because I can, you know, whenever I'm making art out of ready-made objects, I'm always thinking back to like the time when I was able to do like self-portraits and things really well. And I'm always thinking, God, why am I not painting? I've got this like I managed to like train myself to draw quite well representationally. Why am I wasting? Am I wasting it by not using it? Why don't I use my own skill? Like, so that was always on the back of my mind.
It's interesting. You can make you can make pieces of work that like are a bit crap, and then they lead to like really good work. Like, I remember right at the start of third year, they were on this whole third year craze where they're like, we must have like 6 exhibitions a year down in the studios, like, and you've got to make a piece of work for one of these 6 exhibitions. So at the time, I was making a lot of kind of like gestural marks and building up like a surface using um, just loads of like horizontal and vertical lines, like I was writing out computer code. and instead of ones and zeros, it was like horizontal and vertical lines, and drawing all these like symbols and shapes and stuff until like the whole surface area is just covered in this kind of chaos. And then I would get an eraser and kind of like rub out of this surface and make like a landscape. And it was a landscape of like the train station near our university. And I went down there with a recording device and I recorded all the sounds. And then I tried to like transcribe the sounds on bits of hanging perspex using this kind of limited gestural mark making. And then I kind of put it all together. And it was a bit crap, really. But then it kind of reminded me that, oh yeah, no, I really like. It reminded me that I really liked layered work with
Mm.
like a lot of like different elements, kind of like Sigma poke stuff, and then that led to sort of sticking drawings to the wall, that kind of lots of little drawings that made like a bigger drawing, and then that went into I started drawing on card and then cutting the card out into horizontal and vertical lines, and I slotted that together and made this big sculpture called Xerxes, where it was like a sculptural object, but then the surface was also interesting as well.
Mm.
But then it was just made of card and it was really flimsy. And I think I ended up like throwing it away and burning it recently because I was like, oh, I'll never exhibit this again. I've got the photographs of it.
Yeah,
But it's
I've got.
interesting how like the process kind of develops. Like you make one piece of work and maybe it's not that great, but that leads to another piece of work, which also isn't that great, but you've kind of tested out this. And then once you've done enough testing, it eventually leads to this like really grand piece of work. Like working on Xerxes, one of the tutors was like, I don't think you need this kind of surface detail. I think you should focus on the sculpture itself. And then from that, I made Descent, which was a sculpture made of horizontal and vertical lines, but each element was like different colors. I was kind of looking at the colors that Rothko used, and that was in front of a big drawing. It was like hanging in front of a big drawing. And then from
I'm looking
working
at
on
it now.
that led to my degree piece, Hollow Pipes Underwater, where it was like a massive sculpture in the corner of the room made of horizontal and vertical lines that had been cut out, like this sort of like language. I kind of like invented like an alphabet, and it was all cut out on a laser cutter, and I ended up spray painting it with car body paint. But it's kind of like music. It's kind of like one beat leads to another beat, which leads to another beat, and then like there's like a build up, and it leads to like a big crescendo.
Mm.
And I think
Which one's that one?
a lot of artists get like really frustrated with the process. Like they're making like these pieces of work, and they're like, "Oh man, what am I doing? This is like a piece of shit." But you kind of make a mistake, and then you kind of learn from it, or you make a mistake,
Yeah,
and it's like a happy accident, and then like, thank God I fucked around with that for a few hours because otherwise I never would have developed this process or seen it from this angle.
yeah. I mean, you've got to fiddle around with the material for a while to get familiar with it as well. So, I mean, if you're not like, if you're working with a material that you're new to, then you've got to accept the fact that you're sort of an amateur at using that material, and so manifesting your visions is going to be a little bit more difficult. Whereas which is why it's sort of important to like practice using the material as well, isn't it? Um, a bit like a painter would.
Yeah, I found that when I made the piece of work I showed in the conspiracy show in 2018. I was like, oh, how can I make an interesting sculpture like my degree piece? I was like, oh, okay, to save money, I'll get a scroll saw and I'll just cut out all the bits of the sculpture myself rather than using a laser cutter. The one thing I didn't think about was how long that would take. Like a laser cutter is just so much easier. Like it's all like you just draw it out in a program, it's done for you. But then when you're cutting it all out by hand, you've got to like cut it all out by hand and then clean it up and cut out bits again and like sand like the edges so it looks nice, and it's just like fucking nightmare and it takes ages, and there was no need. Next time I would do it on a laser cutter.
Yeah, yeah. I think I became quite good at blowing my own trumpet, but I think I've always been I've always been very very quick at figuring out materials. I've always been very like I see material as like a problem in a way. I think, all right, like if I'm faced with, all right, I've got a vision in my mind and I want to make it look like this. I'm all right, now I'm faced with how do I manipulate materials in the physical world in order to make them look like that. That's a problem for me. And so I'm like, all right, so how do I figure this out? I'm going to try and test and experiment with those materials. I'm going to get hands on with those materials as quickly as possible and figure them out. And to be honest, like there's a bunch of projects that I just straight up haven't done because I will look at I'll look at the quest, the task of making them in real life is just literally impossible almost. It's like you just can't. And so there's a lot of things that I don't do now because just using the material to do them is just impossible, and you have to kind of find a different way to, because it's more about art's more about ideas. Maybe you've got to find like a different way to communicate the same idea. You know, you can make a different art piece but it communicates the same thing. um so kind of like me moving into painting was a way of it was just out of necessity. It's almost like, all right, all of a sudden I don't have studio, I don't have money, I don't have space, but you can always do a drawing, you can always sit down and paint. And so you don't, like a lot of contemporary art, you look at it, it's massive, and it's like you think of like the studios and the resources those people must have. It's incredible. And it's like and I could do the same thing. It's just that um figuring out how to manipulate materials that I'm not familiar with is just a task in itself. Then again, there's a lot to be said for like having the idea in your mind and then not and being flexible. You have to be flexible with it anyway, and sort of accepting, like you said, those happy accidents. So you start working on it, and then you end up realizing you end up creating something else that is sort of very similar to it, but it's more in line with what your abilities are with that material, and but it still looks great and you still managed it.
So this reminds me of an artist called Ibrahim El Salih. He had a exhibition at the Tate a few years ago, and he got put in prison at one point in Sudan because the government thought he was part of some sort of anti-government coup. He's put in prison for like 6 months and 8 days, and he didn't have access to any like art materials or anything. So I think he might have like snuck in paper and pencil somehow, and he drew at night on these tiny pieces of paper and then buried them in the prison yard, and then kept them and dug them up afterwards and stuff, and then used all these little drawings to like construct a much larger work. And then when he left prison, he continued to make work in that way. He would make little bits which would make up like a bigger whole.
Mm.
I was looking at him quite a lot in, I think, second and third year. But yeah, artists, they work with what they've got.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Whatever
of course.
materials are available.
Yeah, it's like there's this strong desire to make a thing and to put it out into the world. And I think everyone has that desire. I don't know. I've been playing around with this idea that all people hidden inside them are artists. It's just that we've created so many layers on top of, we have just piled other responsibilities on ourselves that we find excuses either not to do the art, or we're stopping ourselves from doing it, or something was repressed out of us. A bit like Picasso said something like, everyone's born an artist, it's just a matter of staying an artist. And
I used to think the
yeah.
same. Sorry to interrupt. I used to think the same, but since leaving art school and kind of being immersed in the workplace, like people around me in the office,
Mm,
are just so insanely like uncreative and like insanely unopen to change that it's
mm.
like shocking. Like I won't
Yeah.
go into it too much, but at one point I changed. It was like a table we were using to organize something at work, and I
Mm,
changed like the top column of it, and I
mm.
emailed everyone and I explained why it was better and stuff. And then when I tried to bring it into force, one of these boomers walked across the
Ha!
office and had this like fat go at me, like, "Why are you changing this? Blah 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 blah." And I was just like, I was completely like shocked. I was like, I like talked to her afterwards about it and like cleared the air and stuff. But I was just like so shocked that like somebody could be that resistant to a change and like that uncreative. I don't know if everyone can be an artist, man. Seriously, like I used to think like, oh, everyone's creative and they've just got it hidden and they've like buried it.
Well,
But
well,
maybe some people have like
us,
buried it so far like
hmm,
down inside themselves that they can never get it back, you know?
maybe they can't exactly. The older you get, I mean, but there's that thing that ask everyone. I mean, maybe it doesn't come to, ask anyone like, would you like to write your own film? Would you like to make your own video game? Would you like to make your own band and all that? And, man, I'd say 99% of people would say yes. Now, whether you'd like to make paintings and that kind of artwork, that's something that's different, really. I mean, I think the kind of art that we make is a bit more, um, is a bit more, it's a bit more different. It's a bit more niche, but actually, if you were to ask loads of people, like, hey, do you want to like do you want to be a painter? Do you want to be like an artist and make art all your life and shit? They'll be like, yeah. Do you want to make great paintings and great artworks? You're like, yeah. I think it might be buried, and also there's that desire to make things that say, "Look, I was here." Um,
I don't I think some people just like they are not interested at all. I feel like this is a whole nother topic we could talk about another time. But
yeah,
I think you're wrong. I reckon if you went up to some people in the street and were like, "Hey, do you want to make a film? Do you want to make a painting? Like, do you want to do any of this?" I think a lot of people would say, "Why would I want to do that?" Or like, "Oh, that's a waste of time. Why would I want to do
it's
that?"
really depressing.
Yeah, no, it's a very depressing revelation I've had probably in the past year or year and a half. But when we're making work, we're broadcasting. Like this podcast is being broadcast, but we're not really broadcasting at all. We're narrowcasting. There's a very
Mm,
there's quite a narrow portion of the population that actually gives a shit about art, gives a shit about anything creative. And it's the same with like a lot of pursuits. Like I listen to this fitness podcast and they sell a particular fitness routine called starting strength. And he says having people into his gym to be taught weightlifting and stuff. He said we're not broadcasting, we're narrowcasting because only like 20% of people are actually going to want to take up and continue with it.
mm,
Most people would rather like not do any exercise. I'm sort of trying to
yeah,
train my dad at the moment, and he's like extremely resistant to kind of any
yeah.
form of exercise or anything that makes people are resistant to things that make them uncomfortable, and creativity makes people really uncomfortable, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just breaking free of your old routine. The idea that you could have like a different life as well, like you might be so comfortable in what you're doing, and it might not even be that comfortable. It might be pretty uncomfortable.
I think it
But
scares people.
still be resistant to changing it because it's just so hard to. I mean, even me, like these days. I was thinking earlier, I've got to recommend these books to someone, and I'm like, man, I recommend books to people. And do you know what they say to me? And I'm recommending them books that have changed my like perspective, and they've changed sort of, like I said,
I hate to be have it on the record. I've actually read some of the books you recommended me.
good, 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 good. But I'll recommend them to some people. They'll be like whining at me about something. I'll be like, oh look, I'd love to talk about this all day with you, but I don't really have time. I'll recommend this book. You should read it. And they're like, but I don't really read. And I'm just like, what? You don't read? I'm like, did we go to school together or what? Did we even? It's
Have
just
you ever?
people making. It's just an excuse. It's just a fucking excuse,
But
and it's just
sorry
an
to bring
excuse. To,
sorry to interrupt again and bring Jordan Peterson into it.
oh,
I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson says. He does have some
yeah.
interesting stuff to say, but one of the most interesting things he said was his explosion into popularity is he was putting his lectures on YouTube, and he
Mm,
found that people are much more willing to watch and listen to something than they are to read. He said about like maybe 15 or 20% of the population actually read books,
Yeah.
but everyone can watch a video or listen to like an audio tape. I think that's why Audible is doing really well
Oh
for
yeah,
Amazon.
that's what
And
I've been
even
doing.
me personally, like I find it so much easier to sit in the studio and listen to something than to sit down and read a book. Like The War of Art by
Stevie Pressfield.
Stephen Pressfield, Stevie Boy. I was sitting in the studio the other night and I was like, fucking, I was so tired after work, man. I get really tired in the evenings. I have my coffee and stuff, and I was working. And I put that on, and sorry to talk about motivation again, but fuck, that is like a rocket up your ass listening to him talk.
Yeah, I was yeah, I've been doing yeah, admittedly I've been doing audiobooks actually. I will read a physical book sometimes, but rarely. But yeah, that's exactly what I was saying as well, really. But like people will even not go that far, to be honest. It's like what you're asking someone to pay £5 for an audiobook. They're not gonna do it. But then again, you need to kind of sort of what's the word? Seduce them into into doing any like this sounds really weird. You have yeah, if you're trying to get someone to change, like you're saying, you need to make it. You sort of need to make it. What's the word? You need to compel them to do it. You need to find tricks and stuff. You need to like make it easy for them to do. There's all kinds of ways that you can influence people, and simply telling someone straightforwardly that they should do this instead of that is not enough.
Something that I really miss is going to exhibitions and drawing from observation. I really like drawing artworks works from observation, like drawing paintings or drawing sculptures, and then building up like a gallery sketchbook where you can like look back and you can see drawings of like art you've gone to go see. And when you have to draw something, you look a lot more closely at it, and you pick out details that you wouldn't have done if you just like being like a passive observer. I don't know. Yeah, I really miss that. Like, do you think you could? That's like one of the most fun parts of my practice is observational drawing. Like
Yeah.
especially observational drawing of other artworks. I don't know. Do you think you can make like a practice out of that? I don't know. I feel like at some point
Well,
I'm gonna like I might
there,
like display some of these pictures that I've drawn from exhibitions.
there was an artist who did something similar to that, except I didn't dive too deeply into what she did, but her name was like Elaine Sturtevant. She was like a Dutch artist, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but she basically made like copies of Duchamp's Warhols. She made like I keep saying but people are going to be like, oh, he says Duchamp and not Duchamp. Um, she made copies of like all kinds of artist works, but like direct copies. And I don't get what the idea was again, but that's just what she did. But the thing is, it was all contemporary artists.
Were they like
So
hyper realistic?
no, dude, no. It was like copies of like it was like a urinal, but not by the urinal thing.
Huh.
No, it was the flowers by Warhol.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
She just made the same. No, no, she's just basically doing the same thing, and her work was like a play on copywriting and stuff. Because if you do that, you're going to be doing this sort of like playing around with the idea of copyright, surely, no? You can't just copy someone else's artwork.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: is like what you were saying. Whenever I study something through drawing, I learn a lot more. I know it a lot better. So if I'm drawing a plant, I know the plant a lot better. If I'm drawing a person, I know the person a lot better. As in, I don't know them like inside. I know like I know like the surface of their skin, the all of that stuff. I know that.
Yeah,
You
exactly, exactly.
studying
Yeah.
stuff through drawing
But
gets
Dan,
you
Dan,
way.
you were talking about you're doing more drawing at the moment, aren't you, with charcoals and stuff?
Well, I'm just getting really I've just become quite exhausted at battling with the idea of abstract painting and the idea of conceptual art and ready-mades. I've just become quite tired of that, and I just kind of want to just go back to doing something that I'm good at.
You're good at all,
I
you
don't
know.
think
You're good at all,
you know,
mate.
it's just something I feel comfortable doing, and something I've been doing for something I grew up doing throughout my upbringing, and something I'm very comfortable doing. I can draw from observation quite well, and it's something I need to like. I want to go back to developing. I've just become so fed up with the other stuff, like haggling and like just tackling everything else. Like literally, tackling is the right word. Like I feel like I'm in a rugby tackle with abstract art and conceptual art, when really it's like, look, I can draw. I'm just going to stick to that now.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I kind of feel the same way. That's about all we have time for today, and all we can think about to talk about materials. I mean, like, I'm sure we could drivel on for longer, but we
It'd
got
be
to
drill.
stick to the 1 hour podcast format here.
Yeah.
So, thanks for tuning in again. As always, all the links will be in the description. Please don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm. Blah, 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 blah. Next week, we'll probably have a guest on. Well, no, I say next week, but the podcast is every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, we'll have another episode. We release on Monday, and we'll have a guest. We don't know what the topic's going to be yet, but definitely tune in. And you can listen to me, Henry Pucknell, the abstract constructivist artist, and Dan.
I don't know. I can't really say it now. I don't know anything. I'm just an artist. I can't really say for sure. Like honestly, like the more time goes by, I just say I'm just an artist.